What is bravery in this day and age? It's a very interesting question, because for a person like myself who's been considered a rebel for all of my life, to be called or considered brave is something which I find very odd to begin with. I've always tried to live my own personal life as close to my beliefs as possible. Now, if that's called bravery, I don't know. One of my recognitions as something which could be considered brave, especially for the island of Cyprus here, is I used to work for a newspaper which was owned by the right-wing group over here, the DS Publishing Group, who are extremely right-wing. And when I started working as a features journalist on the newspaper, I insisted that we try to include as much as possible articles regarding the north of Cyprus, which is under Turkish occupation. This may have been considered considerably stupid at the time, considerably brave at the time, I don't know. I just went ahead and did it anyway. And to actually get permission at the time to go to the north with what was called then a press and information officer, who was really secret police, was considered unthinkable. But we did it on a regular basis because it was before the checkpoints opened over the island. So it was a long procedure. The first time took us a little bit longer, but once they saw what we were actually writing about, which was basically human interest stories, interviewing some of the political leaders at the time and getting their points across, but in a very objective way. This was quite an interesting observation of Cyprus before the checkpoints opened. We're talking about the years 1999 and the year 2000, because I was there the whole duration that the newspaper was actually open. And without actually having it confirmed, we were told that they were told to close the newspaper because we were a little bit more progressive for our time than what was actually necessary. We were trying to promote another picture to the outside world and the local market as well, that Cypriot Greeks and Cypriot Turks are not so different from each other. In the same way that there was a lot of pain and deaths and a lot of missing in the south, there also was in the north as well. And we brought up very sensitive subjects like the national anthem, which in actual fact, according to the Press and Information Office in the south, is the Greek national anthem, just without the words, which I find not very, very comfortable to actually begin with. And also the Cypriot flag, which was actually designed in an island-wide competition by a Cypriot Turkish man called İsmail Güney, who is now unfortunately departed, a very talented artist at his time. And we crossed to the north with some colleagues. We interviewed the man, and there was a total uproar afterwards as well. You know, how dare we say that a Turkish Cypriot was involved in the designing of our flag? And you know, when you actually questioned why should I stand up for another country's national anthem instead of my own national anthem, again, there was a total uproar. We bought some very interesting articles. There was one which I find very interesting, and it will stay with me for the rest of my life. It was interviewing a very old lady in the village of what was called Lefkoşa in the Famagusta area, which is a village that a lot of my father's relatives actually used to live there. She was an old woman, about 75, who had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And in the intercommunal strife between 63 and 64, I'm not sure if it was 67, 68, there was a massacre of Turkish Cypriots by the Greek Cypriots in Gofino, the village of Gofino, and her 3 sons were killed by the Greek Cypriots. The boys themselves were twins of 16 years of age, and the oldest one was 17. So you can't consider them men, they were children. And when we went and we crossed to Lefkoşa, and I spoke to Ayşe Hasan, her name, I was the first Greek Cypriot that she had actually encountered since 1974, when we had like the Turkish invasion, liberation, whichever way they want to look at it. And she was ill for a week afterwards. She told me her story. She was totally out of things. She cried. She was in bed for a week. And my friend, the journalist at the time, who actually took me then helped translate for me, he sort of like said to me, I didn't think she was going to actually live after you actually saw her, because you brought back all the pain and the memory of her sons. And her story is one that has to be told, actually. There are atrocities that are heard of in the Greek Cypriot community, but this one to me is one that's really stuck in my mind, with her 3 sons, half her family wiped out in one day. I can just only imagine as a mother what her pain must have been like. And before I left, because part of her story was that she had never been to her sons' graves, because she went into shock and partial paralysis. She couldn't walk, and people around her in the village, they didn't want to hurt her anymore. So they basically, whenever she asked, where are my sons, where's my boys, they used to say, oh, they're working in this neighbouring village, or they're going to be coming later, just to calm her down. So she never actually got to see her sons' graves. So she did ask me, as a mother, on a one-to-one, if I would go and just take some photographs for her. I said to her, you know, if you want, I do have the power to actually get you to come to the south, and I will take you personally to go and see your sons' graves, because it will help you lay to rest their death. And she goes to me, I'm not going to be able to survive something like that. As long as I know someone has been there and I want to see photographs and I will know that they are actually dead, I want to go, you know, I want somebody to go. And as a mother, I would like you to. So I promised her that I would actually go, and I did. We found the community leader, the Greek Cypriot community leader, who actually happened to be from my father's village in Famagusta. So he actually took us to the Turkish graveyard, and it was actually a separate part of the Turkish cemetery, which was dedicated to the martyrs of Gofino, as they were called. It was quite a horrific event, actually, walking in there. Vandalism and time had really destroyed the cemetery. There was no names written anywhere, no headstones. There was nothing. It was a very eerie experience. And I had taken a little bunch of flowers with me to actually put on her sons' graves, because I thought there would be names there. There wasn't. So I just put them somewhere and said a little prayer, even though I'm a Christian, I'm a Greek Orthodox. I just said a little prayer for their souls to lay in rest. And I took a lot of photographs there as well. And about a month after the first visit, I went back to Ayşe and I gave her the photographs. But as I arrived, she was actually saying a prayer for the dead. And I let her finish. And when she saw me, she kissed me. She was crying. And through translation, I found out, you know, that she had been ill since my visit the first time to her. And she said to me a lot of things that have stuck with me. And that is why I'm so adamant that peace should be restored on this island. And one of the things that she said to me was, in all the years that I have been in Lefkoşa, and now that I've come to the realization, talking to you, and having all those memories brought up, that the people who should have been crying for what happened here on our beautiful island, sort of all those years ago, the people who should be crying are not. And it's us, the normal people, the normal mothers, the normal grassroots level. We're the ones that have to pay the price. I said to her that, you know, in all honesty though, that is usually the story with war in any country. She goes, yes, but we must progress. And that to me was the highlight of one of my journalistic experiences there, because what she said is absolutely true. We do have to progress. And at the time I did not think of that as a brave, as you would call it, thing to do, but it highlighted a lot of things to me personally, and I'd like to hope that it did to a lot of people who actually read the articles as well. Because I feel that people who actually do write and manage to speak to somebody else on a personal level through word, you do actually do something for mankind. I've never regretted actually sort of like doing it at the time, because I just went ahead and did it. It was a very important message for me to get out. And I did dedicate a lot of my life at the time, before the checkpoints opened, to getting the voices from the north to be heard in the south. The missing, the mothers of the missing is something that also very interests me as well. The political leaders, both sides, when you've interviewed one, you've interviewed them all because they basically all say the same thing. But to me, what is really interesting is the grassroots level and how they foresee or how they, what their conception is of what they've actually been through on this island. And that is something that I didn't realise at the time, but I've been told afterwards that it was quite pioneering to do at the time. Because not a lot of journalists, well hardly any, if I know if any at the time, did cross to the north. We did actually start a little influx of, you know, it was the fashion after we were closed down to actually interview people. The late Mr. Ralph Denktash, I tried literally for a year to get an interview with him. Did eventually get them, but he is a charmer. But his story and his answers to our questions were very much stuck in the 60s. He never progressed beyond that. Saying that, to me, he was the greatest politician that Cyprus has ever had. And a lot of people might disagree with that, but he stuck with his story from day one, his beliefs from day one, and even till this day, I don't think there is anybody in politics, north or south, who was so, you know, adhesive to their beliefs and stuck with them.
Can I ask you something? I mean, I'm quite happy to hear this. I mean, I was very touched with this story you said, and I will ask you something more about that when I process it. But I would like to ask you something maybe very personal. I mean, this situation here in Cyprus is generally programmed situation. It's not a situation which was like organic. You know, it was programmed basically by British. You know,
Mm-hmm.
did anybody really here in Cyprus ever questioned really the British presence, which is even today so huge here, and really tried to do something against that? Did any political force, both on north or south, tried really to question and I don't know how to say it, condemn this
Mm-hmm.
presence as the main maybe for me it seems to be.
It's a very interesting question, actually. In order to answer that, though, you have to go back to the mid-50s. When we were under British occupation, British rule. There was an uprising with the Greek Cypriots, with an organisation called EOGA, who wanted the British out of Cyprus. They wanted their own independence, and they waged a war against Britain. We still celebrate over here the heroes, the martyrs, who were actually involved in EOGA, and who did not want the British to carry on their rule here, and in part it did succeed. There is also the other organisation in the north called TNT, whereas EOGA wanted enosis, unity with Greece, because they considered themselves Greek first and foremost, and then Cypriot. There was another organisation called TMT, who wanted partition and joining with Turkey. And carrying on the traditional British divide and rule that's always existed throughout the world, I found that this is what actually happened. There was a lot of mistrust put against the Greek Cypriots via the British to the Turkish community, and they were made to have a lot of police presence here, the Turkish community, who were forced into ghettos as well in the early 60s after the Republic of Cyprus was actually formed. There was a lot of mistrust actually being thrown in that direction. And in this way, whereas before, I'm even talking from personal experience here, like my father's village was a mixed village. It was half Turkish Cypriot, half Greek Cypriot. And people just grew up together, lived together. They even had a local football team, which was like Cypriot Greeks and Cypriot Turks together. But as time progressed, there was a lot of differences actually pointed out. I personally believe that this was due to the British plan of actually getting the two communities divided. The Turks were known as the Muslim Cypriots, the Greeks as the Christian Cypriots. You're Turks, you are Greeks. There was differences actually pointed out to them which had not maybe been thought of before. Marriages were not allowed interracially at all whatsoever. This is something that I question and wonder if marriages were allowed between the two communities, whether we would be in this mess today. Yes, there were organisations, there are people, and there were people who actually did put a lot of blame on the British. And like I said, we had the uprising with Ilga, which led to Cyprus's independence, or so-called independence, in 1960. And that is actually celebrated each year, but to me it's just like a funeral, not a celebration, because the Republic of Cyprus doesn't exist anymore, as it should do. And it didn't last very long anyway, only 3-4 years until it was disbanded through to the intercommunal strife.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, I even know the constitution
Mm-hmm.
of the Republic of Cyprus, and I must say that reading this, gives you a perfect picture that everything is legal.
Yes.
Because if the independence is guaranteed by Turks,
Mm-hmm.
Greeks,
And the British, yeah.
And if anybody think it's compromised in such a way can intervene,
Mm-hmm.
then you can see the Turkish intervention.
Well, that was the reason that Turkey supposedly liberated. It was legalization.
No, but I'm talking about today,
Mm-hmm.
because did in any of these let's say openings
Mm-hmm.
of this, did anybody say, okay, but you have to move on, you have to move out, because there are quite a huge region near Limassol or near Famagusta, which belongs still to the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody is questioning today this, or this is
There's
just
very few people that are questioning today. You see, you have to go back to the 1960, independence of Cyprus to actually understand it. And basically there is that Cypriots have never actually been without an occupier, per se. We've had the Venetian, we've had the Ottoman, we've had the British occupier of the island. They've always been like slaves to their masters. And given the independence in 1960 meant they were supposedly masters of their own lives from then on. But they didn't embrace it properly because they didn't really know how to. They were not prepared. If you give an example now, if you look into Turkey, for example, Mr. Erdogan, he had everything planned out for the last 15, 20 years for when he took over in power. All his advisors, all his ministers, everyone has been trained in the West, so they know the West's way of thinking, but they also play to their own people on a local level as well. So he has a balance. We didn't have anything like that. We were just, sort of like thrown in at the deep end and said, okay, you've got your independence, deal with it. And they couldn't, because they basically have no idea how to. They've always had like the puppet master actually telling them what to do. And now that they've been given their freedom, they think, well, what do we do with it? How do we deal with this? And it's not been a learning experience for them at all. They've actually gone the complete opposite way. I mean, if you consider what's happened financially recently, I mean, that's sort of like so crystal clear that they really do not know or have the ability to progress and actually look after their own country how it should be. They're still stuck in the past. And it's trying to get people to actually open their eyes a little bit and think, what do we do from now on? How do we go forward? But a lot of people are just too interested in their finances, or who's got the biggest house, or who's got the biggest car, or what holiday they're going on. Maybe this is going to be the wake-up call that people need here in Cyprus. I don't know.
What happened in Cyprus, if you know, I don't know, that's why I'm asking. In 1922, the Brits were still here. That was the Brits' rule of Cyprus.
Mm-hmm.
And when the Greece attacked Turkey and they almost wiped them out from the peninsula.
They did, yes.
Yeah. What happened here? What happened here?
I have to be completely honest with you. I was born and brought up in the UK. So if you ask me about British history, I can answer you. But for Cypriot history, going back that far, I can't. I really have no idea what happened.
Now it came to my mind that Because for me it was as I don't remember from my school that we were taught about this Greek-Turkish war.
No,
in 22.
but then again, it's not just from 1920, 21, 22. It's the history books over here. If you look at them very carefully, the children, I mean, my daughters at least, when they were at school, they got taught about Greek history, not Cypriot history, and definitely not being told about what the Greek Cypriots did to the Turkish Cypriots. We just heard about what the Turkish Cypriots did to the Greek Cypriots, and from 74 onwards, anything before that was just a taboo subject. You know, it's selective education here. That's why I was very happy when I actually heard that there was going to be a revision of the history books on both sides of the island. But, you know, it's just back burner. It's nothing's been done. It's as if people just want to dwell and milk the propaganda from 74 and not progress further than that. There was a Turkish invasion, fine, get over it. Now what do we do? And what is interesting is a lot of people, like in Gallup polls that I took before Cyprus joined the European Union, and I asked the question, what is your personal expectations of joining the European Union? And the majority of people, I would say 7/8 of the people that I actually interviewed, said, what do you mean, what's our expectations? We're going back to our homes. And I said to them all, do you realise what a common market is? You know, will you be dictated to as to what you can grow, what you can sell within the European Union? You know, life is going to get a lot more expensive. I says, no, we're going to our homes. That was the selling point for the European Union for the Greek Cypriots. That's what they truly believed. And I think to a certain point they still believe it today.
Just I want to ask you, when you were doing this kind of, let's say, balancing the history through your interviews and these stories you were taking, will you ever face some kind of threat of
yes, a lot. You were faced with threats, but I am a rebel, and that just fired me on even more. I was actually asked to spy for the secret police over this side by taking photographs on the other side, which I refused to do. I was called a Turkish whore in both Greek and English and Turkish as well. There were a lot of threats, and like I said, the outcome of actually doing this pioneering work was that they closed down our newspaper because our bosses were being threatened. It did actually rock the boat, but I don't regret a second of it. And if I could do it again, I would probably do it with a lot harder hitting news as well.
Okay, Tina. I just want you to make some kind of small introduction, like who you are, like free sentence. I mean,
okay.
But basic things like your name, that you are born in UK, but Cypriot origins, that you lived in Cyprus after, in fact, you came after the invasion.
91.
In 91 you came back. I mean, these basic things, yeah? And you are a journalist, and then the rest we know.
Okay. Yeah, sure. My name is Tina Adamidou. I'm a London-born Cypriot to Greek Cypriot parents. I was not actually here in 1974 when the events happened with the Cyprus issue, but I came with my family, my 3 daughters, in 1991. And by profession, I'm a freelance journalist and writer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Question, I even asked myself that question as well. Well, I was involved with my first husband for 20 years. We were married for 20 years. I have 3 beautiful daughters from that first marriage. And then when we divorced, I was throwing myself into a lot of my work. And there was a lot of websites that carried a lot of my articles there. And I used to leave my email address on the bottom. So if anyone needed questions answered or they wanted to find out a bit more about Cyprus, they could contact me. One of the people that contacted me was my second husband. He was a mainland Turk from a village, or I can't call it a village because there's more than 1 million people there, from a town, a city called Erzurum, which is predominantly a mountain city. A lot of skiing going on there. People who live in Erzurum have the reputation of being very chauvinistic, very much a man's man. and women are at home cleaning and cooking and whatever. And he sent me an email and actually asked me, because I'd pointed out that Nicosia was still the only divided capital in Europe. And he couldn't quite understand this. So we started communicating via email, and his English was not that brilliant. My Turkish was not that good. He didn't know a word of Greek, but we somehow sort of like managed to communicate. And his emails became more and more regular. Until such time he goes, I would like to see what you look like if you don't mind. So I said, yeah, I haven't got a problem. So we went on Skype and we started communicating through Skype. And he was an absolutely gorgeous looking man. Because like I said, as you've probably realised, I don't sort of like look at a person's ethnic background or race or whatever. If a guy's a nice looking guy, he's a nice looking guy regardless of where he's from. And we started communicating and things sort of like progressed. After 6 months, he actually told me, I think for the first time, you know, I can see you in my life for the rest of my life. You know, I want to be with you, I want to marry you. I said, what, 6 months, you've never seen me in the flesh and you still want to marry me? And this carried on for about 3 years, until such time I went to Turkey on some trip over there to do with training, and we actually met up. And it was fireworks when we actually did meet for the first time. And then he decided he could not live without me. And he wanted to come to Cyprus. And I thought, no, I'm not ready to get married again, not after 20 years of marriage. I wanted my freedom. And he battled and he battled and he battled until eventually he wore me down. And I did feel sorry for him. Okay. He's been trying for 4 years to actually persuade me to marry him. Do I really want to be alone the rest of my life? You know, it was a decision that I had to make because he was becoming more and more obsessive and adamant that we should be together and that he can't live without me. I was flattered because he was a very extremely attractive man, and he was also 17 years younger than me, which is another factor. All right, he all had all the signs of being wrong, but I went ahead as usual and did it anyway. It was quite an eye-opener because I said to myself, if my children don't agree with me getting married a second time, then I won't. If my children don't agree with me marrying a Turk who is considered my country's enemy, then I won't. The only person who was very adamant that I was making the biggest mistake of my life, or in my words, the biggest miscalculation of my life, was my father. So I didn't tell my father to begin with, but I told the daughters, and the daughters said to me, it's your life. You know, we don't obviously want to see you alone for the rest of your life, but a Turk, you know, I mean, he's our country's enemy. And I thought, God, I failed miserably. For all these years I've been doing bicommunal work here and trying to get them to see that there is no them and us, and all of a sudden I'm having it thrown in my face. So I said to me, if you don't want me to marry, I won't. And they said, well, you're going to be miserable if you don't anyway. So I went ahead and did it. It was a battle to get him to come to Cyprus. There was a lot of issues that had to be taken into account in order for him to come here, because I said to him, we can live together. I don't mind that, I just don't want marriage. So he said to me, fine, if that's what you want to do, that's what we'll do. But the law over here says that he has to be married to me. So we had to actually get married, and we had to arrange the wedding before he came over. And he literally arrived, and within a month we had to get married. It was a big rush job because I actually discovered a lot of my friends, they tried to sit me down and said, are you sure you know what you're doing? And I said to them, I'm in love. I mean, you know, what's wrong with that? I said, but you're not in love with him, and you know you're not in love with him. You're just a rebel, and you're doing this because it's going to ruffle feathers, and you enjoy ruffling feathers. I said, no, I don't want to be alone for the rest of my life, and this is as good as opportunity as any. I said, okay, you're going to do it anyway, so go ahead and do it. And then the time arrived. I think it was a few days before the wedding was due to take place. My father arrived unexpectedly in Cyprus, because he's still living in the UK. And he has a key to my apartment. I was at work, Erkan was at home. And my father opened the door, went into my apartment and saw Erkan there. He looked at him and said, hello. And Erkan said, hello. He goes, I'm Jimmy, Tina's father, and you are? He goes, I'm Erkan, Tina's husband. And, well, you can imagine what happened after that. My father telephoned me and my daughter telephoned me on the quiet and said to me, your dad's arrived, he's just seen Erkan, they're talking. I went into panic stations because I hadn't had a chance to tell my father. I didn't know how to tell him. And anyway, I went home in the evening and my father said, you're making a huge mistake. You're making a huge mistake. How could you do this to me? You've disgraced the family. It's our country's enemy. They've, made all our family refugees. And I had everything thrown at me. Obviously, he didn't come to the wedding, my father. My daughters came, or two of them, because one was studying abroad at the time. She didn't make her way back for the wedding. But I had very, very few friends at the wedding. A lot of my actual people who I thought were very good friends of mine did not come, or they sort of like kept their distance from me. They were kind enough to actually meet him. They said he's a nice guy, can't find anything wrong with whatever. But, we just can't understand why you did it. So anyway, we were together for 2 years. In that 2 years, he couldn't find a job in Cyprus. There is a lot of racism here, especially against Turkish people. A lot of people actually said to me, if he was a Cypriot Turk, it might have been a different story. But being a mainland Turk, no one would accept him for a job. He was a qualified chef, worked at 5-star hotels, absolutely nothing. We couldn't find even a part-time McDonald's job for him. As soon as they heard where his background was from, they didn't want to know. It put a lot of pressure on us because he was spending a lot of time at home. I was out working. I was going home tired. There was a little bit of friction between my daughters and him. And in the end, he was going to Turkey 2-3 times a year. I was obviously paying for the tickets and everything. It got to be an issue. My health was beginning to suffer at the time as well. That I decided in 2010, 2 years after the marriage, when he went to Turkey on holiday to go and see his parents, I rang him and I said to him, Erkan, I don't think this is working. I think it's best you stay over there. And basically, he tried to come back here again. He told me he can't live without me, the same thing, but I wasn't having it. And I was not going to go down a 20-year marriage again, the same as I went with the first husband. So, I put my foot down and said, no, enough's enough. On hindsight now, I was crazy to go ahead and do something like that. But that's not a matter of being brave. I think it was being stupid. There's a big difference. A lot of people actually said to me, we could never do what you did. But it was taking on my own family, my children, my father, relatives. Some of my relatives actually rang me and said, we've heard your news. You are more than welcome to come to our homes, but don't bring your husband with you. So it was quite an eye-opener because it was the first time I'm a very family-orientated person to actually be told by my own family, you're welcome, but he's not. And that goes against all my beliefs. To me, that was a huge injustice. All right, the marriage didn't last, but just the fact that his ethnic background was from Turkey, I still cannot understand till this day why there was so much prejudice against us being together. He still rings me from time to time. He's vowed he's never going to get married to anyone else. I was the only woman in his life that he will allow to be his wife. He keeps asking me if there's anybody new in my life, and I keep saying to him it's none of his business. But it was an experience. It was very much a learning experience, not just about myself, but also about my community here in Cyprus. Not a nice experience, though.